Well, let's bring in Robert Fisk now, the foreign correspondent for the independent newspaper in the United Kingdom, joins us now from Beirut. Robert, you've been following developments in Syria closely since the crisis began. What do you make of this latest news?
Well, they have gone for the jugular, as we say. This is the classic way in which regimes tend to fall. Suddenly, either the top men defect or they are liquidated. This is the most astonishing event we've seen in terms of bringing down the power of Bashar Al Assad since the very start of this long and terrible tragedy in Syria. And the fact that the brother-in-law of the president has gone must have an enormous effect on Bashar Al Assad himself. I cannot imagine what the Russians are saying. In the Kremlin, there must be some very serious conversations going on at the moment, as well as the United Nations. But I think this is we could always say, well, when Klaas's son defected, he was a Sunni Muslim. When the ambassador to Iraq defected, he was a Sunni Muslim, though a more important defector. But this has gone, this is the jugular, this has gone right to the throat and the heart of the Ba'athist Assad regime.
And therefore, given that, it's going to be a pivotal point in the crisis.
We've been going through tipping points and pivotal points in this crisis since it began last March. Look, I think no one can deny that the battle has been brought into Damascus. There are tanks in Damascus. There are tanks around the presidential palace. This is the classic scene of what happens just before the end. Now, I still believed, until about last night, that Assad might hang on for a lot longer. Now I'm not so sure at all. I actually called the Minister of Information in Damascus this morning and said, well, how about a visa now if all's well? And I thought the official I spoke to sounded very frightened, and now, of course, we know why.
And Robert, as we assess what's going on and President Assad himself digests the information of what's transpired here in Damascus today, what do you think his next step could be?
Well, you see, he's in a very difficult position. He certainly is in a difficult position. A Syrian friend of mine who used to be quite close to the regime made a very good point to me the other day when we had the first sniff inkling that something was happening in Damascus. Supposing he wanted to leave, supposing he wanted to go to the airport and fly out, he's going to be driven to the airport by an Alawite colonel in the army or the special forces. What's he, the driver, going to be thinking? I'm driving the president. He's fleeing. Why should I take him to the airport? I think it's much more likely that we'll see someone possibly step forward from the military and say the counter coup. Bashar has stepped aside, we maintain the stability of Syria, but I don't think that's going to satisfy the Syrian opposition in any way. But I think I think Bashar will be looking over his shoulders to see who's going to push him, and at the same time wondering about the flying times to Moscow.
Robert, hang on there. I just want to play you this clip that we've got here from Nawaf Faraz, the Iraq ambassador who defected, the Syrian ambassador to Iraq, who defected from Bashar al-Assad's regime on the 11th of July. This is what he told our sister channel, Al Jazeera Arabic, just about an hour ago.
Today is a day of happiness in every Syrian person's home. Today, every mother grieving for her child, every child who has lost his father, every father who has lost his children can breathe a sigh of relief because of this exceptional, very courageous and very complicated operation. The National Security HQ is the regime, the very heart of the regime. It's what plans and what cooks up everything that is happening in Syria. It plans and executes Bashar Al Assad's orders to kill the thousands who have died in Syria. This office is very important. It's led the country in practice since the beginning of the uprising.
That's Nawaf Faraz, the former Syrian ambassador to Iraq. And Robert, as he says, this is struck at the very heart of the regime, isn't it?
I think so, yes. And if we get some more ambassadors defecting, as they did, of course, as we know, with Gaddafi's Libya, that makes it even more important. It'll be very interesting to see what the army is going to do now. I mean, we've seen pictures of tanks in the streets of Damascus. We know they're around the presidential palace. Remember, the Egyptian tanks were put around the radio station and the palace a few days before Mubarak went. But this is not going to be a soft revolution. Not that the Egyptian revolution was soft. This is still going to be, I fear, a very bloody one. You have to realize that one reason why the Russians have gone on supporting Syria is that their great fear is that there'll be another Chechnya. And remember, Chechnya is not very far north-east of Syria. You know, if you tip our Western-centric map up the other way, Chechnya is actually quite close to Syria, and it's worth remembering that one of the things that Hafez al-Assad used to worry about was an uprising that would imitate the uprisings and the breakup of Yugoslavia. His worry was not that there'd be an Arab revolt, but that there would be a Muslim revolt which would look like Yugoslavia. And remember, the sectarian divisions in Yugoslavia during that terrible war are not unlike the sectarian divisions in Syria at the moment. So I think Hafez al-Assad probably got it right, and we're actually looking at a kind of breakup of Yugoslavia. Certainly the horrors and massacres and atrocities that have been taking place are very similar to what I saw in Yugoslavia during the Yugoslav breakup war.
Robert, let me just read you something that James was talking about a little bit earlier. I don't think you were actually online at that point in time.
I was racing to your studio, yeah.
Right, okay, well, yes, exactly. But you were talking about Russia yourself just a second ago. It'd be interesting to see what they've had to say. And in fact, they have said something already. And it is from the Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, who said a decisive battle is in progress in Syria. He goes on to say, and if we're talking about a revolution, then the United Nations has nothing to do with it. Adopting the resolution would mean outright support of a revolutionary movement. What do you make of that?
I think Russia was in the past rather keen on revolutionary movements, wasn't it? Suddenly it's not. The same applies, of course, with the Iranians. We have the Iranian ambassador here who all along has been praising all the Arab revolutions except the Syrian one. And of course, we all know why. Look, I think the Russians must be very worried. I'm told that they have many more Russian Marines in Tartus, which were brought in on those 3 big warships that came in 3 weeks ago, than we believed or we knew. And one of the Russian fears, which I didn't believe at first, but I do tend to now because I've spoken to a source here who's just come from Moscow, is that chemical weapons will fall into the hands of the opposition rebels, or rebels, revolutionaries, call them what you like, and that some of those Russian Marines would be tasked to go as quickly as they could and seal them off and take them away. Whether they could do that, because the Russian troops won't be terribly popular in Syria, that I don't know.